You're listening to the Sketchnote Army podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, and this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey, are you looking for the ideal sketchbook for your sketchnoting practice? The Sketchnote Idea Book is the sketchbook designed for sketchnoters. Equipped with no bleed, no show-through paper, you can take almost any marker or pen you can throw at it. Get 10% off with code ARMY at airship.store. Everyone, it's Mike, and I'm here with Gary Kopervas. Gary, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Mike. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah. Did I say your name right? Kopervas? Is that the right way to say that?
That is spot on.
Really?
And that doesn't always happen. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I just came back from Holland, so I've been aware of very unusual names and trying to pronounce them. That was about a month ago, end of August, early September. So
I think everyone who's been mispronouncing my name, I should ask them to make a visit and bone up on the pronunciation, because I often get the Kopervas as
right,
as in the metal or the copper. So
yes,
appreciate that.
Yeah, not a problem. I always try to make sure I say the name right at least.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the one kind thing I can do for somebody. But let's get into a little bit about you. We've crossed paths because I think we ran across each other on LinkedIn, and I really liked your stuff. I think you liked my stuff. We got chatting, and I said, you'd be a really good candidate for the podcast because of the work you're doing. And I'm always trying to push the boundaries of who I talk with to sort of go more to the edges. And
I think we have some people in common who introduced. I was aware of your work prior to that, but some people have talked about the podcast, and I think we have them in common. So that helped sort of facilitate today. So I'm grateful for that too.
Yeah, I think there was. Now that I think back, there was someone who recommended you. I'm trying to remember who it was that recommended you, but
Martha.
Martha, yes, of course. Yeah. So once I saw your work, then that totally made sense. So I'm glad. Thank you, Martha.
Okay.
If you're listening.
Yes. And I think she will. So she'll be happy for that.
She's a pretty dedicated listener. I do know that. So
yes.
Well, why don't we get right into it? Why don't you tell us a little bit of who you are and what you do, and then jump right into your origin story. How did you end up here? You can go back all the way to when you're a little kid if you want to. I just love I love the origin story because it tells me so much about the person and sort of what motivates them.
Yeah, that's very true. As far as today, I guess I would describe myself as really a cartoonist turned copywriter turned creative director turned brand consultant. So it has been an evolution, and not really stopping something and starting to do something else. It was always sort of continuing to do what I did in the early days, which we can talk about. But I started to evolve it to the career that I was in, and I went from college to advertising agencies. I live in New Jersey, and started in New York. And just to answer your question of who I am, I am Gary Kopervas, and then I'm all those things that I just mentioned. And I grew up East Coast, so advertising was always something that I wanted to do, and probably not many people. You might, we'll see. Is growing up, there was this great television show called Bewitched.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I watched Bewitched all the time.
And she was a genie out of a bottle. I think it was I think it was a documentary. I'm not sure, but she was a genie. Oh no, a witch. Sorry about that. That's
Bewitched. Yeah.
Genie. Bewitched. She was a witch. Elizabeth Montgomery, and a cute witch, and married to an advertising executive. So it was always like, man, I have to look into this advertising thing, because it was always creative, and it was always, Darren creating these cool campaigns, and then his wife, the witch, would always splash it up with something really cool and amazing, and Darren would get all the credit, for being so creative. So, it was a sitcom when you're a little kid, but I just thought, this advertising seems like it might be a good thing, which did dovetail into, I guess, an origin story, is that I was a quiet kid. I just kind of didn't talk a whole lot. But I found at some point writing and drawing and playing the guitar became really great forms of self-expression for me.
Mm.
So I started to just write stories and comics, and I grew up around Mad Magazine and Marvel
Yep.
Comics. So there were times, and I had a mom, like many moms, who saved a lot of things, and I would see these elaborate stories of things that I had written and illustrated. So the cartooning thing was
Mm.
really a great thing for me, because it just allowed me to, at some level, make sense of the world around me. So it was always, I didn't write journals per se, but I kept pretty good, maybe unconsciously at that age, but I would always draw what I was into and draw what I
Mm.
was interested in. And, to look at it years later, it was always amazing. But one of the examples, and I still laugh about that, was parent teacher night. The teacher said to my mom, "It's like, oh, we asked the kids to draw something that they like, and a house, maybe a turkey made out of their hands, some cotton clouds." And I brought into class the illustrated, as best I can, the parody of The Godfather from Mad Magazine by Mort Drucker. Just painstakingly drawing, Sonny Corleone, and my mother was like, "Wow, all the other kids had, like, houses and trees and yellow suns, and you came in with the Godfather parody." And they kept an eye on me for a little while, but it was just an example of, I was fascinated by getting lost into writing words and drawing
Mm.
pictures. But
Mm.
the true origin story goes back maybe a little bit further. But like most, and looking at your wall, it's fun to see, and reminds me of superheroes and
Yeah.
Marvel. And like most kids that are 6 or 7 years old, Superman and Batman, maybe Captain America or Thor, and I would draw uh, them, which was really great for things like anatomy and drawing just what human beings look like, and that was kind of fun. But in drawing that, I like many kids, wanted to be Batman, and Batman was really kind of a fun thing, and I would have stuff on walls. But
Mm.
there was a period of about a year or two when, I can't explain it, but that's how the culture works, is I really got excited about Zorro. Do you remember
Really?
Zorro?
Yeah.
And Zorro was the swashbuckling,
He left a Z, and when he would like
he did
fight crime or whatever, right?
and I thought that was a cool thing. So me being a quiet guy and using drawing and writing to express myself, when I was around that same age, 6 or 7, I thought it would be like a really cool idea that on one rainy day, I did have a Sharpie. Maybe it was my first experience with Sharpies, where I put little Z's under the furniture in my family's living room furniture. So I thought it was cool. I had Z's all underneath, sort of put under various pieces of furniture, until my mother did see that and said, "Come here a minute. What gives on all this furniture? There's little Z's under all it under our living room chairs. What's with the Z's? Did you draw the Z's?" And I want to remember it this way. I'm not sure if it actually happened, but it was like, "Mama, I really didn't draw those Z's. Zorro did. I mean, I had nothing to do with it." After talking to, and probably a grounding, I realized, do not deface furniture with Z's. But at a very young age, I found there was something really interesting about drawing and writing and letting your
Mm.
imagination run, and to get a reaction from people. And what I think it did is it allowed me to build confidence, because I was sort of quiet, and played sports and did things like, hung out with friends in the neighborhood. But I think you started to find, hey, I'm actually okay at this. I can write and I can draw, and I usually get reactions out of people, not always favorable, with the whole Zorro thing, but it was an opportunity to express. And I followed that into jobs, and started to shape this idea that I was very visual, but also wrote. So sort of a
Hmm.
left hand, right hand, and then what kind of sealed it for me was to follow this little arc of an origin. I was in high school, like many, and in a chemistry lab in high school, maybe 10th grade, 11th grade, maybe it was a bio lab. And it was a 3 hour lab. And the teacher was, I still remember him. He was a really serious guy. And I remember wearing earth shoes, and he wore his pants really high, and he had a beard with no mustache. So I couldn't help but say, man, he's really sort of a comic character. So it was an afternoon of learning about the Doppler effect, about the little dropping of balls into the water, and the rings of things, which is pretty important at the time. And it was long though for me. My mind started to just wander, and my hand and my imagination. So I started to, in my notebook, draw a picture of this teacher talking about the Doppler effect. And it was a bit of a caricature, but it was taking something he said about the Doppler and drawing
Hmm.
it. And a neighbor nearby said, let me see that. That's fun. That's really funny. So I started this a Doppler effect of distraction in this classroom, where people grabbed the notebook and passed it. All of a sudden I realized it was getting away from me. People laughed, and they're like, oh man, and as teachers often do, they pick up on that right away. And he saw about three rows away from me some disruption. So he walked over, and he looked at, hold that one second, may I see this? And he saw the picture that I had drawn, and with this little scenario, and in a poker face, didn't say much. And he said, oh, who did this? And I was like, uh-oh. This is going to top my Zorro experience. This is like
Yeah.
serious now. So he came over, and I heard this little earth shoe squeaking, as he made his way through the rows, because people were sort of like, who drew this? And I got,
It kept pointing backwards. Yeah.
people gave me up. So he and I still remember, walked up to the side of me, and I was just sort of playing it cool. And he looked down, and he said, did you draw this? And he put the notebook in front of me. And I was like, dead to right. What am I going to say? It's like, yeah, I did do that. And I was expecting, oh no, I'm probably I'm out of here. I'm going to probably go someone's office. And he looked at it, and he goes, so you did this? I said, yeah, I did this. And he goes, silence. And it was like 2 seconds. And I thought, oh, it's just boiling up. This is not going to go well. And he
It's
goes,
getting worse. Yeah.
could you add color to this? And I want to put it in a frame and give it to my wife. And I just thought,
Wow.
that did not go the way I thought it would go.
No.
He said, this is so funny. This is really, I would love if you can just maybe pull it out and clean it up and put some color in it. And I like to give it to her for fun in a frame. And I realized at that point, the reactions that you can have, even in the
Mhm.
most, unexpected places, of just
Yeah.
an idea, and a visual, be it comic or just a diagram or what have you, that just captures people. And I just thought, this is starting to get interesting. And then from there, I went into college and studied business, thinking
Hmm.
advertising, and then got into creative departments. And then it's been that um, trajectory ever since. So
Hmm.
it's funny that those early stories, the early days, had led up to what had been, a pretty long career now.
Wow. Yeah. It sort of prepared you in some ways um, to be ready. I love that you're, channeling the spirit of Zorro to your mom, right?
Oh, yeah.
I guess she probably was thinking like, well, at least he drew it on the bottom of the furniture, right?
He said maybe he was thinking a little bit, but it was on the bottom. I don't know the mental process then, but it was so important that I did not do the top. And I think it was that Zorro had that little mask, and he was sort of
Yeah.
mysterious, so
Yeah.
he didn't want to go over the top. So, and that was one of my early memories of that whole
Wow.
creativity.
One of the first taggers, I guess, Zorro. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, at least Sharpies could rub out and wash out if you wanted it to, but
Right.
Zorro went right into the wood.
He would cut into there. Yeah.
He would cut into the wood, so I wasn't completely Zorro. So, but they were forgiving,
Yeah.
thankfully.
And as they were on the bottom. Yeah, that's really cool. I love the story about the teacher as well. Because we have had a fair amount of teachers on this show, and they're really embrace visualization. It seemed like this teacher was open enough to do the same and see the value. Like, wow, he really was like, I would think any teacher that walked up and saw that, leave aside the humorous drawing of him, which he
Hmm.
enjoyed, right? It worked out that he enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You were paying attention, right? Like you were capturing information, and the stuff he was telling you, you were receiving it, right? That's a reflection of what you received. So
And that's a really good point, and I hadn't thought about it before. Trying to pull out what maybe would become mechanics of some sort that I would do later. But I was listening to Doppler and all the and I had him in some context that said, I heard you, but I'm just going to interpret it." And I think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what, whether it's either sketchnoting or even workshops that I often do, is I'm hearing what comes out or comes from,
Hmm.
and then quickly interpreting it and putting it
Right.
into somewhat of a visual context, as you know. And it just isn't solely reporting what you hear. It's not like it's a stenographer, court
Right.
stenographer or something. It's interpreted and enhanced, so it's more memorable and sometimes even more
Hmm.
entertaining.
Right. And you're often connecting. I find myself connecting dots. Like it may be
Yes.
unsaid, but there's a connection between these things that as I look at it, these have impact on each other, or they, one doesn't exist without the other. And you can
Hmm.
sort of visually connect those things, which could
Exactly.
be pretty interesting. Maybe you did that as well in the work you did. I think, the other thing too, as a scientist, right? So he was a scientist. His
Yes.
whole job is observation. You have to be a good observer of what happens and then document it. You did all those things. You were observing him. You're almost as though he were a monkey in a zoo or something, right? And you're observing like all the details.
Yeah,
And then
it's
you're
true.
capturing what he was saying on top of it and putting it in context. I'm kind of curious. Did you ever hear back from him what his wife thought of your drawing? Did you get feedback on that frame drawing?
I did, and it was like hallway, because I remember it was, and I still had another year. I think it was like a junior year. Like
Mm,
I was still there around for a year, and but he was a tough teacher grade wise, but
mm,
he did have a bit of a sense of humor, and it was
mhm,
almost like Catskills kind of humor, where
mm.
I think I hit a nerve, and he
Yeah,
might have been like, I don't see that here often, so it was a bit of a surprise.
right.
And I think probably the following year, my senior year, and and oftentimes, if I remember correctly, a lot of teachers would hang out in the hall or near their classroom and welcome. And I remember walking down the hall towards him, and we made eye contact, and he was just sort of like,
I remember you.
he did a little bit of the De Niro from his movie.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, I gave it to my wife around Valentine's Day or whatever it was. And he goes, she loved it. Now she'll never, let me forget about how high I wear my pants. And, so he even had a bit of self-effacing humor in order to
Yeah.
just want me to just tighten it up so he can give it to his wife. And I think
Yeah.
we had, in a way, a bit of a connection there, where
Mm,
he was grateful, but still, maintaining his teacher status. But we had a
yeah.
moment in the hallway the following year where I walked away feeling pretty good. I kind of probably forgot about it, um, but made me feel good. And
Mm,
other kids in my class, yet again, kind of the quiet guy. And I find there's a little bit of a relationship of sometimes the quiet guy's the instigator. You gotta, as they say, you gotta watch the quiet guy. You
right.
don't know what he's up to. And it was a moment where people remembered that and said, it was fun, and they remembered it years after. It's like, hey, how about that lab class? You remember that? Yeah, it was funny.
Gary, Gary the mastermind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And so talking about all that, so obviously you went to school and you ended up you talked about cartoonist, copywriter, creative
yep.
director, and now brand consultant. I'd be interested to hear the trend. It sounds like you didn't really stop doing the one thing. You just sort of layered things on top, right? So you sort of built
Yes.
all those things into the way you operate. Tell us how those things layer, and what does that look like now that you're a brand consultant? How do those different
Yeah.
parts come into what you do?
Well, that's a great question. And it was a little bit of that. It was, um, I'd started out as a junior writer at different agencies. One was in New York, and then I wound
Mm,
up going out to the Midwest. And so you're just doing what you're told, and you're writing for whatever clients you were working on. But I found myself, and it's this was years before even knowing what sketchnoting was or
Yeah.
people actually did it. I was in, like many, in meetings, lots of meetings, and some boring meetings. And there were times where, when we didn't all work on our laptops, which was a little bit like, geez, I don't know, I wish I knew what that. We all kind of wrote in notebooks and things. So
Hmm.
we would often sit in, circles or semicircles and just notes and say, okay, let's take a break and we'll come back in 10 minutes. And oftentimes people would go by and look, in matter of casually walking by and look at my notebook, and it was just organized differently. Everyone else had the
Mm.
same notes taken the same way they took it back in high school and in their biology classes. Just that everyone's notes looked identical. But in that 90-minute meeting, they would look at mine and go, what kind of going on here? What is this? What are you doing? You should be paying attention. Your notebooks should all look like everyone else's. And I was
Yeah.
like, it just didn't process that way. And my mind would work in, as I often described it, in like sound bites and snapshots. As the
Mm.
information came out, an image would pop into my mind, and all of a sudden I would just doodle, a lot of doodling. I would doodle an image and then write what I heard around it. And they were just little episodic sketches during a 90-minute meeting. And people would be
Hmm.
like, how do you do that? How can I do that? Because I would want to take a guess and say, I'm going to remember yours a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it's that idea again of verbal visual working together. And it just became, I got somewhat known for
Mm.
amongst clients and creatives of like that odd note-taking kind of style. And then the progression said, hey, we have a large meeting where we're going to do a whiteboard, or we're going to just put a butcher paper up on the wall. Could you just track notes, and can you stand up and do that?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I think I could do that. I mean, I haven't, but I'll put my notebook aside and grab a couple of these, markers, and sure, let's do it. And I started to do that sort of in a larger scale at meetings, and I noticed people would take their phones out later on, once people actually took photos with their
Yeah.
phones and took their phones out, took pictures of it. And I was like, wow, that's why are you doing that? And he said, I don't want to forget it. I don't want to forget what we just did, and plus I want to
Yeah.
share it with my team.
Yeah.
So I was finding those moments where, be it a high school moment where it connects and someone engages with it, years later, engaged with it when they saw it on a conference room table
Mm.
or in a room. So it just continued to progress, and people kept waving me on, just
Mm.
do it over here and do it over there.
Kind of
And then
encouragement. Mm.
and then there was a moment where it went from, doodling and sketching for my parents, to some positive and negative effects. And then doing it in high school and having a moment with some teachers where it's just like that was a reinforcement. And then being in the working environment and ad agencies and with companies, uh, them calling it out is kind of different and helping me to remember the material. And I thought that's really kind of cool. And then there was a moment in the working world where I worked for maybe 10 years or 12 or more in new product development.
Mm.
So as a group that I was one of the four sort of charter members of a company in Cincinnati that started to do new products. So we would go into rooms and work with teams and research and sales and various others, and start to build concepts for either beverages or foods, or with hotel chains on how to build
Mm.
these new service programs. But it was basically going from nothing to prototypes
Mm.
and just loosely done sketches. And that was really a great, call it a decade of that kind of work, where you're working in the intangibles and being able to sketch quickly. And that was always a great expression that someone shared with me, is that a doodle is really the first prototype for anything.
Mm.
And that really lived in the new product era. Another moment where I thought, okay, it's on now. It's kind of interesting. Is I was doing an innovation session in Chicago for an education company that, in essence, trained accountants to become CPAs.
Hmm.
So it was training based and education based. So a friend was running the program and said, "Hey, can you come out and join us for a couple of days and help facilitate and work their group for new ideas and new approaches, strategic planning kind of thing." And I said, "Sure, I'll do that." So I showed up on a Friday, or no, what I left on Friday. So I showed up on a Wednesday, the night before, and we often grab a bite to eat and talk about, okay, what's the next 2 days going to be about? And I
Mhm.
really hadn't known much about it, and she was always, just go with it. You're pretty good on the fly. Just it's the usual thing, except for an education brand. It's like, okay,
Mm.
but meeting with her and the rest of the team, somewhere between me leaving and showing up in Chicago, somebody had said, I spoke to the client and they're really excited to do this, but someone sent me something in a PDF, and it's called some kind of sketching." And we were all like, "Well,
Mm.
what do you mean exactly? You mean like prototype, just like writing in sketchbooks and sharing it?" She said, "No, in front of the room, to hear the ideas and then to
Yeah.
live sketch them in the room and move on to the next it was a strange request, because somebody said, "Hey, any of you guys do that?
Here you are.
Anybody
I
with
do that.
any experience?" And it was like a very good friend of mine said, "I didn't even see this coming, so don't feel obligated, but do you want to try?" And I said, "Well, I've done it in this capacity, and it was always fairly
Mm.
loose and spontaneous.
Yeah.
Now this was part of an expectation of a 2 day conference."
Right. It's different.
So I remember asking, "What is the client's expectation?" So they said, "I'll send you PDFs of what it is,"
Mm.
and it was largely what that you would imagine it would be. A
Mhm.
lot of just loose sketches and a lot of mind mapping. It was more energetic and more visually interesting mind maps than just circles and
Yeah.
hubs and spokes kind of thing.
Mhm.
So at that point, it's like, what do I have to lose? Yeah, okay, I'll do it. So they went out and got foam core or other types of materials and handed me the markers, and I showed up in the morning going, this is either going to go pretty good or okay, or
Never going to do this again.
I'm never going to do this again. Because and it might have been when you really started to make this more mainstream and make people aware of it, of sketchnoting. All of a sudden, people are like, "Hey, I saw this thing. Can we do that?" And it was a moment in time where probably a lot of what you were doing and some of your colleagues, someone on this client team said, "I'd like to incorporate this into
Mm.
our session." And now it was maybe one of the more lucky instances that I could imagine, because um, it went really well. It's just, while I was doing it, I started to, you have that out of body where you look down and go, "Man,
Yeah.
this is like so much energy. And look at these people. There's laughter and and I found at that point the style started to emerge a little bit,
Mm.
which was it had a lot of that cartoonist in it.
Yeah.
Some of my objects and some of my people looked a little Don Martin like from Mad Magazine, and people were like, "Oh, that's funny." But there were many drawings over the course of 2 days. There might have been 8 or 10, which was kind of fast stuff, and I realized, man, I'm kind of gassed at drawing. But I went home and they did ask me to do some buttoned up, cleaned up versions,
Mm.
and I still have that set of 10 or 12 that were fun to do live in the room, and it really helped the team look at all the ideas and go, no, I see all the components, and you really characterized it. Get rid of this one, we'll keep that one."
Mm.
And my friend who organized the session said they loved it, and it was better than they thought. And there was a lot of people who had their hand in it, but me playing this little, it was like an improv, and I played in bands in high school where you
Okay.
show up with your guitar with a bunch of strangers, and they're like,
Do
"Hey,
some jamming.
Walk This Way by Aerosmith?" It's like,
Yeah.
enough, and boom, you're off.
You go.
So it was sort of a jam session using sketchnoting, And it was
Wow.
one of those moments where I thought, okay, I got a new arrow in the quiver, and
Yeah.
it's a pretty sharp one and a pretty cool one at a time when there was growing need for it. So the agencies
Yeah.
that I worked with, they also had like, hey, we got this, different way of doing things. So I started to do every meeting like kickoffs and immersions and presentations and even strategy meetings where I became a little bit of the clanky monkey with the cymbals, where I would come out and they're like, do that thing, and then years went by and I realized this is an extension of all the things I did early
Right.
on. And
Yeah.
now there's a market had been created for it. And again, I take this opportunity to thank you for a lot of what you'd put out that did a lot of the heavy lifting.
Hmm. Oh, thanks. Well, I think there were a lot of other people doing it too. And graphic recording, which is more of that large
Mhm.
scale in the front of the room stuff, existed since the 70s with David Sibbett and
Yeah.
some
Grove.
others, The Grove,
Yeah.
and some others. MG Taylor, I think Matt and Gail Taylor were doing it. They were also part of that early, way before.
Yeah.
In my experience, I didn't know that graphic recording was a thing. I stumbled into and invented the name sketchnoting and practiced it because it made sense to me. I didn't know if anybody else could apply it. It was just totally me making sense out of like note taking because it wasn't working.
Yeah.
Right. And then come to find out, hey, all the concepts that seemed really logical to me is the same stuff that these people standing in front of rooms getting paid to do the work are doing. And so then I got involved with many of the people
Yeah.
in that community. So now I'm connected to that community. So there's been a lot of people, I think, over time that have been slowly building that wall. And there's
Hmm.
lots of people now that enter the business or the space or the community, whatever you want to call it. And there's a huge wall built that you can walk on, right? A bridge. Somebody built this bridge, but it took,
Yeah.
10, 15 years of work to put that
Yeah,
up.
exactly right. And the other observation, which was a moment, was I think during COVID, we're all, I mean, globally, all kind of stuck in
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
in homes, and communities started to pop up, and people, and it was is critical that people chose to do that. Is that people started sharing, and I started to see, these similar things to what I was doing, but way different, and something
Mm.
that I could be inspired by, coming from people in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
in Finland, and in the UK. And all of a sudden, without noticing, a year and a half later, I'm connected to and sharing and just chatting to people, throughout Europe and
Yeah.
and various other places, that there's a bit of a kinship there that,
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, again, and for me, when you work at different agencies and things, you get a little focused just on what you're doing and who
Mm.
you're doing it with. And now there's such a community out there where there's always something new to learn. And I think we all learned that, a while ago, is that continuing to learn, keeps you plugged in, keep you relevant,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always a new perspective to learn something by, and I could look at some people's work and going, wow, that is so much in the way that works for them. I could never do it that way, but I really like how maybe the mechanics of it is something that I can
Yeah.
apply to my own thing. And then
Right.
the great thing is that most of the people that I've been in touch with, they're like, happy, go. Yeah, I'm glad something clicked for you, and
Right.
go and use it. And now I'm adapting different tools and templates for branding assignments.
Mm.
And now, I mean, you might be, I'm sure, is some of the work of Dave Gray and
Yeah.
Sonny with game storming.
Yep.
There were times where, and prior to seeing game storming, I just realized I'm just kind of having fun and upfront and drawing these funny little templates and asking people to put post-its on this, cartoon head of, an empathy
Yeah.
map, before I knew what an empathy map was.
Right.
And
Right.
I realized that's a whole nother layer of this cartoonist turned brand guy that somehow made meetings more enjoyable, and clients would be
Mm.
like, that wasn't even work, that was fun. And I thought, okay, that's something I'd like
It's
to
pretty
hear.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just, again, adapting some of those muscles that got built up and some of the other muscles that were deliberately, built up in
Mm.
terms of advertising and branding. But it's been an interesting journey, and one that it was not prescribed. I backed into a lot of different
Mm.
environments. Like the new product thing was just really something that through circumstances, an ad agency wanted to get into new products. And I wound up being one of the people that wound up
Mm.
working in that part of the agency, and thought that was no dumb luck. That was really kind of
Mm.
a cool break.
Yeah. Well, I think, on the flip side, you prepared yourself by doing all this work as a kid and continuing. Of course, you had encouragement like by your teacher in high school, but you were sort of doing it because it made sense to you and you were putting in the hours, right? Doing it in meetings for yourself, then called before the group to do it and they really gave you
Mm-hmm.
feedback. So you got like all this prep put you in the position like so had you not been doing that and you had the opportunity to be part of that product group, you probably wouldn't have you may not have gotten the job, at least not to do that, or maybe not at
Yeah.
all. I don't know, right? Because you had the skill that was unique that you could bring to the table. And obviously, it was the people that decided maybe you should be part of that had seen it in practice in the
Yeah.
past, right? So everything's sort of built on top of the next thing.
I think that's true. And I was lucky in some of those respects where it was as much of a surprise or an
Mm-hmm.
epiphany to the people around me as it was to me. And just in a very, I think, basic sense, um, you're adding value that maybe isn't everywhere. I mean, and I think a lot of the people I've met, and yourself included, um, it's an interesting package of talents,
Yeah.
and I think it's something that it's just not something you see in um, classified ads.
Yeah.
You become an amalgam of your experience and your
Mm-hmm.
talents, and it makes you you. And I think if you could find a group that appreciates that and really feeds it, which had the opportunity to work at a branding agency over a decade where they kept feeding me more opportunity to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's about growth, and I think I'm happiest when I'm growing.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too. Well, this has been great. It's been really fun to see your progression to where you're at now and how you're using all the things that you've built. They don't go away. They just become useful at different points in the project, right? So
Mhm.
this episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast is brought to you by Concepts, a perfect tool for sketchnoting, available on iOS, Windows, and Android. Concepts' vector-based drawing feature gives you the power to adjust your drawings anytime you like. You can nudge the curve of a line, swap out one brush for another, or change the stroke thickness and color at any stage of your drawing, saving hours and hours of rework. Vectors provide clean, crisp, high-resolution output for your sketch notes at any size you need, large or small. Never worry about fuzzy sketch notes again. Concepts is a powerful, flexible tool that's ideal for sketchnoting. Search Concepts in your favorite app store to give it a try. I'm really curious now if we switch over from
Sure.
the work, your background and sort of how you got here. What are the tools that you like to use? We always do this with every guest. I
Yep.
discover new stuff all the time. And I thought I'd seen everything. So I love this part of it because there's like, oh, I'd never heard of that pen or that notebook or that something.
Yeah. Well,
So,
yeah, I wish I could bring more discovery to it, but I'm a work in I- I'm a in terms of the transition from analog to digital, I'm a
yeah.
bit of a work in progress
Okay.
because I still love and maybe it has a lot to do with the nature of the work was always show up, and it has changed since COVID where there's mural and
Hmm.
mural, and it's different,
Yeah.
but over those years of development, working with markers and paper, I think it was just, I love the feel of a line, and I have a lot of cartoonist friends because I've been doing this cartoon strip for many years now, and I have a lot of
Mm.
cartoon friends, and they're still like, man, you still dip a quill pen in ink, and then there's one or two that I still know that are like, there's nothing like a feel of
Yeah.
that line, but a lot of the tablets now and the digital tools. So I'm doing my best, and I found some coaches to move me there, but I'm one of those types, particularly with, being very mobile and working in a place where it's just coffee shops and other places. I like being able to walk in and buy tools from Rite Aid,
Yep, I agree.
and whether it's a nice gel pen or I have a friend who is a very Rob Armstrong who does Jumpstart, very successful long running strip. He still hand draws all his strips in a
Mm,
paper with a paper made pen. It's just,
really?
and some people are like, that would take forever, and I think it's a call you make, but I do love the times I've dabbled and toyed with, iPads and things, but I need to do some work on the digital
Mm,
side.
hmm.
Um, and I'm constantly and you may have found this too, but there were stores in the past. There was an art store called Pearl on the East Coast.
Mm.
These superstores, where it just I can get lost.
Lost in there for a day, right?
And I'm buying pens and paper, and there's one in Philadelphia, which I'm not far from, called Blick.
Yeah, Blick.
And Blick is one of the remaining stores, and I like Copic. I'm a
Mm,
fan of that. And there's a couple others. I think Japanese made that has a really fine brush to it where
mm,
you can I love varying lines and creating
yeah,
some depth. But my tools are what they have been for years, and I would even ask, I even turn it around and say, your tools, what do you recommend digitally? I mean, is it
mm,
Wacom? I mean, do you kind of, where are you at in the whole transition to
yeah.
digital?
Well, I would say just understanding that you're someone who's mobile, and I'm a mobile person too. I think the iPad and the pencil is pretty great. The resolution and with the pencil and the screen is good. I recommend some kind of a screen cover. I like Paperlike, which
Mm.
has got little patterns that are printed or embedded in the plastic. So not only does it make it matte so it's not shiny, but it also provides a paper-like texture, hence the name.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's really key to know, and I'd love to even go back and get that again once this gets out, because the times that I have toyed with things, it's a little tricky to. It
Mm.
feels like you're drawing on
Yeah.
a glass surface, and it's just like
Yeah.
I have other daily strip friends who do comics and go, I couldn't go back to that because my process is so quick, and now I can knock work out a lot faster, and
Mm.
their production approach is vastly different, which I can understand. Where I have some shopping to do and figure out what I'm most
Mm.
comfortable with, and
Yeah.
but I'm in the middle of it. I have an iPad now that I kind of toy with,
Okay.
but I don't actually uh do work on
Do
yet.
production. Okay.
Yeah, I let the syndicate does my coloring and that kind of thing.
Okay. There's a few apps that you might consider. Procreate's popular with lots of people. It's really aimed at art.
Yeah.
It's got layering like Photoshop. You can choose different brushes and colors, and you can record it and have it animated. There's all kinds of power in there. If you need to edit your lines, like if
Yeah.
you want vectors like Adobe Illustrator, there's a couple of tools. One is called Concepts, who sponsors the podcast,
Yeah, I think I've
where
seen that.
you
Yeah.
you have different brushes and such, but then you can grab the points just like an Illustrator and move things around, and you
Yeah.
can select whole chunks and change to a
Beautiful.
different brush and it flips. Adobe Fresco is another tool that does both pixels and vectors in the same application. So that's another one to play with.
Hmm.
And there's a variety of other ones. Some people who are really doing more note taking than art
Yeah.
lean toward other tools. So like there's lots of really great note taking tools, Good Notes and Note Shelf, and even Apple's Notes is pretty decent. It supports the
Mm.
pencil. So there are some that are more note oriented. So like if you need the organization and the structure of notes and to be able to search and all that, then that might be the better path. And then there's stuff that sort of fits in between. Like I use a tool called Paper by WeTransfer. It's super old. It was designed when the iPad first came out, and it's what I like about it is it's very limited. So
Mm.
I can't
Yeah.
change the screen size. There's no layers. There's limited tools, and the tools
Huh.
had limited sizes. The colors are adaptable, but I kind of like the constraints. And what I found is I've invested so much time using it that if I need to knock out an idea quickly, I just go to that tool because I know it so well. I know where all the
Yeah.
parts are. I know what it's going to achieve. I know how to achieve them, and it for me, it works really well. But I also use
Yeah.
Procreate for illustration work because it's got benefits of resolution and layers and undo and other features. So I think it's you almost need to take a little tour on each one and see which one fits. And there might be need for, I believe, in multiple tools because some
Yeah.
projects require different expectations. So if you need to make something that needs to be zoomed up to a billboard, well, you probably want to use a vector tool because Procreate's going to pixel out at some point, even if,
Yeah.
unless you build the canvas to be big enough, which is one approach. The other approach is to go, resolution independent with concepts or fresco, and then you can scale. So
Yeah,
those
that's
would be my list
all good
for you.
stuff. No, that's a great one. I'm gonna have to pull that off because um yeah, sort of a near-term goal I set for myself is to really get set and
Mm,
getting that comfort level because a lot of my cartoonist friends use the same type
mm,
of a setup, and
okay.
I've dabbled with there. So I'm gonna have to step into this century
I think
and
it's important for you
make
to
the move.
find what works for you.
Yeah.
So even if they use something else, who cares? Like if it works for you, you know this already.
Yeah, I love
And
the point you made that if
mm,
you have really stuff to that you're accountable for, you have something that's familiar and reliable, and you know what you're getting
yeah,
into, and then
yeah,
create experiment time to try some other things. But
yeah,
that would be my ideal setup is to have my go-to,
yeah. I
get
think the other
good
thing
at it.
that works for me, and this isn't true for everybody, but it might, is I need a real project to work on. Like when I wanted to use Procreate, I had a big illustration project, and I said, all right, I got to use this. I got to figure it out. I forced
Yeah,
myself to sit down and build the templates and choose the different uh, inks and sizes, and I set it all up, and then I forced myself to do a project with it, and that was a good solution for me. I tend to I learn them as much as I can, and then there's a point which I have to flip over and use it, and then they start to make sense together. So
yeah, no, that's good advice.
yeah. Um, So going back to your analog tools, I'm kind of curious if you have any specific ones that if you go to the Rite Aid, are there certain pens or notebooks or anything that you tend to work with? You have any notebooks that you like? Is there a certain gel pen brand that you prefer if you can get it?
Yeah, that's the I think in terms of paper, it for as long as I can remember, it's always been the uh oh man, what's the it escapes me at the moment. Uh, uh, I want to say velour, but so that's
Mm,
not.
like parchment paper, something like
No,
that.
it's a little heavier weight paper, but
Mm,
it's in Michael's is another place that I go. It's
okay.
just vellum. Thank you.
Vellum, yeah.
My
Boom.
whatever
Okay.
part of my brain says velour. It's not velour. It's vellum, but it's Bristol vellum, and it's been um the vellum has that nice tooth to the line.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
and I still love to see the interplay between a line and a piece of paper and scan it. And whenever I see, my strips, the weekly strip I look at, and it's just like I remember that line, and it's a little obsessive. But I do like the Copic pens of a lot of variety, but it's a good firm tip, doesn't mash.
Lays on
So
top of that Bristol vellum as well. I think
yeah, and
it's
you could lean in, and that's good. And then there's is it Tubo? I forget. It's a Japanese pen. They sell them in two, and then I go through them like
mm,
whenever I see them, I buy them. But they're mostly one's a firm paint or a
mm,
brush tip. The other one's a little more of a traditional paint or a brush, I should say. But that's usually in the Michaels or the Blick. But I think,
mm-hmm.
and this is from Rob. He does a lot of his lettering with a paper made pen.
Paper made flare,
It's
yeah.
the flare. It's like the Chuck Taylors of sneakers of
Yeah.
mark making. I mean, it's just like tie up the chucks and put them on. And whenever I'm in Rite Aid or CVS, it's just like, okay, buy a couple things we need. Milk, bread, paper mate.
Paper mates.
And I just and always have those. And I'm thankful that they don't uh uh discontinue that. And but I have huge, just boxes of pens, and
Mm,
I'm not loyal to, other than what the ones that I've mentioned, because they've served me well, and I do need to experiment and push out, but
Mm.
those are the Copic and the Papermate.
Simple tool
That's
set. Yeah.
what I use for the strip, and my strip I do on the vellum. I just scan them, clean them up, and send to the syndicate. I work with King
Mm.
Features, and King Features does all the colorizing, and they distribute it to the papers, and they send me the finished, and it's just
Mm.
like always like Christmas. I send them these little black and white comics, and then they send me the archives of all the
Mm.
colorized the strip. I do a strip called Out on the Limb, and it's been like 30 years with King, and it's always that same relationship as I send them
Mm.
the finished black and white, and they
That's cool.
colorize it. But all my other friends are like, I still use my digital because I want to color it the way I want to.
Mm.
And that's, I should get used to that, but I love that King does that for me, and it's a nice joint relationship for many years now.
Yeah, it's worked for a long time. Maybe it doesn't need to be changed at all.
Yeah, it will eventually, or at least being able to control it and send.
Yeah.
I'm sure they wouldn't be mad if their production team in Orlando goes, "Oh, he's going to do color. We don't have to do that anymore."
Yeah.
Thankfully,
Yeah.
it took forever, so we'll see.
Huh, interesting. So that makes me curious since you're a cartoonist and you continue to be for a long period of time. What
Hmm.
I think could be interesting to answer would be how do you deal with every week you've got to come up with an idea. Where do you get your ideas from? How do you how do you cook up those? Are they just stuff that you encounter and you put them away somewhere? Do you have a tool or a notebook where you write things down? Like how do you manage that stuff?
It's really interesting. A lot of the same muscles. It's like listening and observing, and somewhere somebody said this and it always stuck, which is like you got to do ABC, always be capturing.
Hmm.
So wherever I am, and now with iPhones, if I see an absurd uh, notion in the world, I put it in the phone, and then I have
Hmm.
a bit of a writing routine where Sunday nights I often go, okay, let me see this culmination of photos and post-its and backs of envelopes. Uh, the world is great stimulus for ideas, and sometimes I'll just stockpile them and then uh, sit down and process it. And there was an incident where I'm sure you've noticed is that I was walking through Barnes and Noble and went through like the top 10 uh, books, often business books. So the top 10 business books, 6 out of the 10 business books had the F bomb in it. Suddenly,
Yeah.
major business books all have F words, we'll keep it at that. And I just
Yeah.
thought, what is that? And then my mind started to play with that whole reality. And a cartoon happened where there was a woman. I took it out of the bookstore and put it into the standard library, and saw a little librarian with a bit of a potty mouth talking to somebody who was directing them to the business book of the section, which is essentially the cartoon was like, hey, it's okay. Let's everyone just F away, man. It's accepted. Because I just thought, wow, when did this like people are now writing books to see if they could top someone
Yeah.
else. So that was just an example of ideas happen because I just kind of always keep one hand free. And I heard recently there's a great quote by Neil Simon, and he said it for comedy writers, but I think it's true of cartoonists, but also anyone who's creative. And Neil Simon said, comedy writers are two-headed monsters. One head is like everybody else. They go to the DMV,
Hmm.
they go to Rite Aid, they put gas in the car. That's the one head. The other head is the one that kind of rises up and looks around
Hmm.
and notices all the things around that other head and the rest of the body. So and that's why that one really spoke to me, because my wife will be one saying, we're at this parent teacher night, and my mind is like, wow. And she's like, Earth to Gary, can you kind of dial back in here into this parent teacher night? So part of that is I do have that second head kind of out there looking for odd connections to make. And,
Hmm.
I'm hoping it never stops, but I'm always looking and always capturing stuff I can maybe use later. And many times it's writing it down in uh, um, a small notebook and
Mm,
other times with the laptop, and now with the phone. That's the one piece of digital that I've become really reliant on is
mm,
photos and notes to myself,
yeah.
because it is true. You forget those epiphanies, and there are times where um, I'll read a note, much like an old Seinfeld episode, with a note he put on his next to his bed where he couldn't decipher what it was he wrote at 2 a.m. There are times where I can't make sense out of a note, but I still feel good having taken the note,
Yeah.
because there are times that some of the best ideas come from other people and just being in the right
Yeah.
place. And that's why many of my coworkers coming out of those meetings that I described earlier, once they see me write something, they're like, you didn't write down what I said, right? I'm not going to be an inspiration for a cartoon. And many times they had, and I share it with them, but there'd be just brilliance that are far beyond what I'm thinking at that time. And I would just write something down, and
Yeah.
later it became the sweetest little gag. And I often share it with them, and they're,
Mm,
going back to my science teacher, they're happy to get it. So,
yeah.
you know, and every single day, and particularly in the world we live in now, there's just so much.
Yeah.
Uh, to your point, constantly making new connections, and that's why I think there's always stuff to have fun with and build ideas
Mm,
around. So it's
mm,
paying attention.
mm. Well, let's shift into tips. So I always frame it that someone's listening, they're individual thinking, but they feel a little bit like they're in a rut or hit a plateau. They just need some inspiration. What would be three things that you would tell them, practical or, mental suggestions to help them break out of that rut or just move forward?
Yeah, I think, and this isn't too long ago myself, where I started to feel like it's a bit of a rut, and also a
Mm,
rut, but also sometimes when you transition, because I moved from agency life into now my own consultancy, which it's a different world, and
yeah.
it's a different um metabolism almost. I mean, it's just different, and I think that led me to this idea of the tip is sometimes just continue to, like, and I'll use my case of writing and drawing and things, is to create and share. I mean, there are
Mm,
so many people that I'm sure yourself, and I know people like Austin Kleon has a book or
hmm
two out there. It's just like, just put it out, and let that be a source of conversation. And during that time when I started to expand some of the community with sketchnoters, I would just do things, whether it was listening to a particular podcast, and I just would draw it and say, here's something I
mm,
did. And it turned out to be something on LinkedIn where I
mm,
started to share more, and I heard back more, and I got
yeah.
feedback. So whenever you're stuck, um, put something out, and if there, that's the beauty right now of even LinkedIn. If there are people that you admire, or people that whose opinion you'd appreciate, share something and say, here's something I'm working. I'd love to get your thoughts. And
Mm,
there's no harm could come from creating something and putting it out and sharing it. I mean, you might get feedback that people sometimes are always kind, but I think by and large, the tip would be to just create every day, and put it out there,
mm,
and start conversations with it. And there were times where I do, and I call them copious notes now, because my name
mm,
is Kopervas.
yeah.
So I will listen to a podcast or something of an example of, if I was stuck going, I'm not generating anything anymore. I will listen to a podcast or something. A friend of mine who wrote for Forbes interviewed Brian Grazer, and it had to do with this. He was launching a book called The Curious Mind,
Mm,
and my friend Steve said, "Here, could you just listen to this? Um, listen to this interview that I recorded, and can you give me some your takeaway on it?" I listened
mm,
to it and sketch noted the whole thing and sent it to him, and he sent it to Brian Grazer, who is in the process of a couple other things with this writer friend of mine. But in doing that sketchnoting, I learned a ton about this idea of I'll cut to the chase on that one, is that Brian Grazer has curious conversations. from his book.
Mm.
Every 2 weeks, he talks to someone who has nothing to do with Hollywood or directing or producing to learn something. So maybe a long way around to the other idea of do things and share is if there's something you want to learn, draw it.
Yep.
Because there's just that eye hand thing is that your mind learns when you draw it. And it turns out that many of that type of thing, I sent work to authors or even podcast guests, and they loved it. And we had relationship of, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever, of send me more. Or so I think if I'm stuck, I try to engage new people with work I've done and see where it goes. Because in some cases it's led to consulting gigs. It's led to there was a two authors that wrote a book, and I was taken by it, and I did a quick sketch note for each of the chapters, or actually for just one of the chapters, and they hired me to do that for all of their chapters.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah.
And it just, so ruts are just kind of like, a pause, and it's like, okay, now what? And I think it's when I get to that point when I'm stuck, it usually means I'm at a pause of some sort. I need an interaction with somebody.
Need a reason to move forward, I guess, right?
And someone will inspire it, or someone will validate something I've been, thinking about. And I think I've learned to rely on others to get me through these little pauses and ruts.
I would, if I were to restate those, I guess the first one I heard was, if you're in a rut, do something and share it.
Yes.
The second is, if you want to learn something, draw it, right? Because you have to process the information to understand it. And then the third would be, share your work with the people who inspired you. So like a podcast guest, an author, and you never know where that interaction might lead. If anything, you'll just have their appreciation, and you've done all those three things in a row is you've done something to move forward, you've learned something new, and you've made an interaction. That's a really great combination of things.
I love the distillation on that, Mike. Thank you. And I think the other, I don't know, maybe it's a wrapping for all of it that I have found whenever I get stuck in a crossroads, whatever, how you want to describe it, to do some of those things. But it really helps to just get on someone else's radar.
Yeah.
And I found, whether it was from other brand consultants or those sketch noters in other parts of the world, get on other people's radar, they get on your radar, and all of a sudden I find myself not stuck as much because of that happening to me. So I think there's something about that, and I think we live in a time now where it's much easier to get on other people's radars because we have such access now, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn is very big from a business standpoint. So use it.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thanks. So to wrap the show up, I just ask where people can find you and your work so they can connect with you, so they can see what you do. They can check out your comic strip, see your work that you do.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I do a lot of posting, and it does have a bit of a business centered approach to it. But I put a lot of things there because so many of my things tie to business. So LinkedIn is one. Facebook is a little more some fun stuff, and I'm there as well. And at Copious Notes on Instagram, I've been not pushing that as much, and maybe when this does get out and is live, I will have gotten back on that. But Copious Notes is where I'm at in Instagram, and same idea is work in progress. GaryKopervas.com is a site that has gone, I've neglected, but there's a lot of my early cartoons there, and that's either last quarter or first quarter of this year where that's going to get kind of reinvigorated, perhaps. Yeah.
We're really happy to have you on, Gary. This has been a long time coming, and I'm so glad that you came on the show, and you just fit right into our community just so well.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a real pleasure, and it was, as you say, I was really waiting for this for some time, and it was awesome. So thanks for having me, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, well, thanks for all that you do, and for anybody listening or watching, It's another episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast. Until next time, talk to you soon. The Sketchnote Army podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohdesign Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of Amp Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends, and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.